So good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of vBrownBag. Tonight, we are very excited to continue our series on IT, the IT career series, how to get into certain types of careers, how to do transitions from the mid-career tier levels, things that you're going to want to study. And tonight, we are getting into a very interesting topic and one that some people don't think enough about. People that get into the technical field sometimes don't think about how important sales skills are in this area. We are always selling, regardless of whether or not it's technical or whatnot. And our presenter tonight, Joe Onisick, is going to get into it. He's a fantastic presenter. We're very excited to have him on. But first, let's go through a couple of show notes. Getting on the conversation. If you are in the, oh, come on, click. Why aren't you clicking? There we go. Get in on the conversation. If you at vBrownBag, we will be paying attention to the Twitter sphere. We will be fielding the questions for Joe. If you are in the live studio audience, we will be fielding questions for you as well and handing them over to Joe. Oh, and hello from DC. Hello, Anwar. Nice to see you tonight. Tonight, again, our presenter is Joe Onisick. If you want to follow him on Twitter, he is very easily at joeonisick.com. You can learn all about his fetish for cars and motorcycles and all things that consume gasoline and various other topics. He's certainly fascinating. I, of course, am Chris Williams. If you want to follow me, I am at Mistwire on Twitter. And tonight, I am also very happy to present to you Ms. Ziggy Englert. Ziggy, you want to say hello?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. So for a little background, I have been colleagues and a kind of, Chris Williams has kind of been my mentor for, I think, 7 or 8 years now. It's been a while. I recently myself kind of accidentally fell into an IT career track in the past kind of 1.5 to 2 years. And so he's been awesome, both mentoring me in life and now specifically in my career. It worked out so well for me. So happy to be here.
So we are very excited to introduce Ziggy to the vBrownBag family. She is going to be co-hosting tonight, and she will also be a solo host in the future. So welcome to the family, Zig. And if you want to follow her on Twitter, she is easily at Signe Englert and SIGNEENGLERT. Cool. So with that, Mr. Onisick, are you ready to take the power?
I am. Let's see if I can properly share this and not goof it this time. That's the word I want, goof. Okay. Is that sharing? Are we sharing?
That is sharing. I can see your screen, sir.
Do you care now? We're caring and sharing and all the good things. Okay, excellent.
We are. Oh.
All right. Well, thank you for having me back, even though my Wi-Fi connection bombed on me last time, which is my fault. I should have known better. But yeah, let's go through sales skills for technical types. I do a lot of training of technical architects of how to be part of a sales team. And so all of this comes from that and my experience as a technical seller throughout my career. But I find this to be absolutely critical set of skills in everything I do in my job and then in everything I do in my personal life. As Chris said, there's always something going on in sales or we're always in some way selling. Let me get my slides clicking forward. So Chris, alluded to what was going to be the first slide. We're always in sales, whether you think it's selling or you think it's negotiating or you think it's having a discussion. We're always trying to persuade another individual into something. And it could be something as simple as let's go to Italian instead of pizza. Or a bad example, let's go to French instead of Italian. How about that for dinner? Whatever it might be, what we're looking at is trying to persuade somebody to do something. When we look internally at our groups as technical people, maybe we are technical sellers, and so sales is part of our role. This is applicable there. Maybe we need to convince our management, our boss, or our team that we should take a different direction with a project or something. These skills apply there. When you want to go negotiate a promotion or a raise, these skills apply there. So whatever aspects of this you take, they should be applicable as we go throughout. So looking into that, as we go through this, whenever I train anything sales related, I'm going to start with this. I don't want you to go out and be a sleazy used car salesman stereotype. I want you to add value to your customers. So these aren't tips to trick people into buying stuff they shouldn't buy. These are tips to help you more elegantly get your point across to add value in the conversation, in the relationship, whatever that relationship may be. So the skills aren't here to be sleazy. As we start into looking at this concept, if we take a look at the sales concept itself, the first thing I like to do is get rid of a few misnomers. So when you look at selling technology to a customer, Harvard Business Review did a bunch of research on this, and they studied how customers buy and what customers say they buy on. And what they came up with was a series of value criteria that are the value reasons a customer will purchase a technology, a product, solution, software. When you look at that, a lot of the things we would assume are very, very important don't end up very high up the value stack. So when we work in the IT field, cost tends to be one of the things we throw around the most. Whether you're buying technology or selling technology or brokering technology, cost is a huge constant concern. But it's at the bottom end of why customers buy. And that doesn't mean it's not something that's important. It means it's something that's considered table stakes. Most people aren't walking into a Rolls-Royce dealership unless they're in the market for a Rolls-Royce. So the table stakes of cost have already been met. Same thing in tech. Same thing when you're working with any type of sales conversation, trying to convince somebody to go take a solution, use a solution, adopt a solution, or buy a solution. Sales it needs to be assumed at table stakes. You need to move higher up to start really adding value. And so this is whether you're trying to position something within your own company or sell something to another company, you want to look for tangibles that are more meaningful. So as you get up the stack, you see things like reducing my time, reducing my stress, improving my career. The more you get into what you can do for that other person, that other entity, whether they're your colleague, your boss, or your client, the better your tactic is going to be. So we want to get away from the things at the bottom that are, it meets your needs. It checks every box you asked me to check. It costs a cost that you can afford. Great, we're done. Now, what can you actually do that somebody else can't do? The other interesting thing, and the reason I talk about this quite a bit, is because buyers in this study didn't think that they operated this way. So they asked a bunch of questions of the buyers. How do you buy? What is most important to you? And the answers were things like cost, and it must meet my requirements. And then they studied how they actually bought and what they bought and what that sales cycle looked like. And HBR found a lot of differences. They found cost to be a bottom criteria, and things like the knowledgeability of the person they dealt with and the responsiveness of the team were far more important. So again, these are all things you can add into your process as you're trying to persuade somebody or sell. The next thing, and this is one that I see technical types fail on all over the place. It's the how we look, how we establish authority, right? When you walk into a room, for whatever reason, you're being judged on what you look like, and it's always going to happen, but that's your total appearance. So this isn't a talk about looking a specific way and wearing the right tie and being the perfect robot. It's a talk about looking like you have authority in the environment you're supposed to have authority. So I picked 4 random, like completely different pictures, but each one of these people establishes a level of authority with the look on their face, the outfit they're wearing, and the way they're looking. They're standing there or sitting there confidently ready to do whatever the thing is that they're there to do. So if I look at my top left, this woman is there looking put together in the right outfit for the environment she's in, with a cleanly put together sign that has a message. She's somebody I want to know what she has to say. Just by glancing at her, I want to give her the time to tell me what she's talking about because of that look. She's not wearing the perfect business suit. She's not wearing the perfect shoes and purse. She looks right for the environment and like she has a message. On the right, this woman is also establishing authority. She looks knowledgeable. She looks dedicated. She looks engaged to her viewer. She's pointing to information while making eye contact with the person on the other side of the lens. That makes her engaging and helps her establish authority, and she's doing it remotely. So she looks different, she's dressed different. It's not some high-powered business suit, but she's still establishing a complete credibility at a glance. And that glance lets you get the next word in. So that glance is very important. We get down to the bottom left. Obviously, somebody who has knowledge to share and is ready to share it. He's sitting literally in front of a clean slate. He's giving me that example of authority the second I look at him. And this could be whether I'm looking at him over a web conference like we're doing now, or if I'm looking at him in person or walking into that classroom. And then on the bottom right, if I walk into a local bar and I see this guy sitting on a couch, I'm going to ask him to be my life coach in a heartbeat. He just looks like he knows exactly what I want to be doing with myself for the rest of my life. He's calm, collected, sitting in his element, and he looks like he owns the place. And again, it's that environment with that person and the way he's putting it together. So as engineers, we tend to not worry about wrinkles and this and does all this match. And I'm not asking you to be a style expert. I'm just asking you to take a thought of what people are going to see when they first see you. So if there's a bunch of tattoos and nose rings and stuff, that's great. Just make that look fit, make it all work together so that you can establish authority when you walk in front of that room. And you can choose to ignore this, but it just adds a little more difficulty in the conversations. So it's your option. These are dials we turn to be more effective or less effective, depending on our personal tastes. Next up. When we look at that conversation, so we've moved past that first glance. You walked in and hopefully have some authority in the engagement in the conversation you're in. Now we need to communicate. And I look at sales, I look at communication the same way I did network administration or architecture or engineering or servers or storage. It's a system. People are a system and we operate with some default behaviors. And a lot of those default behaviors revolve around communication. So when we look at communication, we all know that verbal communication is a small percentage of actual communication. But do we know how it really all ties together? Right? So this is the way I envision communication. When you look in the very center of my Venn diagram, we get understanding. But I have to have the context of the conversation and your intent in mind to create this. Somebody can say the same thing to me in two different moods, and I will react very differently, right? So my mood matters in the conversation. Their intent and mood matters. So this is just a moment to step back and remember that if you're trying to convince somebody of something, persuade them of to do something, or sell them on something, you should be using your two ears and one mouth in proportion. You should be doing the opposite of what I'm doing right now, which is yap, 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 yap. You should be listening to understand what they're saying so that you can identify their needs in the situation. And if you can convince them that you can meet those needs, that's how you get persuasion or negotiation or a sale. So when you're thinking about communication, think about active listening. If they're saying something that you don't believe or that you don't agree with, or that's different from your viewpoint, try and put yourself in their shoes for a minute and assume they're right. Try and assume that maybe they are right so that your brain can get out of your own hangups and again, get that communication moving. You don't have to agree to the thing at the end, but put yourself in that mindset. That level of communication is the biggest part of any type of negotiation or sale. The more connected you can get with the other person and their needs, the easier it is to fill them in some way that gets the results you both want. So if you want to learn more about active listening, I have a link here from Lifehack. I found that a really quick and easy read. This is something that I have to actively do myself and remind myself every time I get in a conversation. I fail at it constantly. I yap and talk and overtalk. So I have to keep reminding myself to come back, listen, try and find the other person's angle so that I can help them solve it. When I'm looking at this from a sales perspective, if I'm selling technology, or if I'm convincing my CEO that we need to adopt new technology or change to a new line of business, I'm always starting with a business or boardroom thinking. So when I was the lowest network engineer or the lowest sales engineer selling to the lowest network engineer, on the lowest on the totem pole, I still wanted to know what the business was doing with the technology. Because the more I understood how this translated up the stack, the faster I could move my career. The same goes when you're sitting there trying to decide, we want to adopt this, or I really like this new technology. Let's see if we can get the team to bring it on. I want to understand what that might do for the business. Is that going to decrease our operational time, therefore increasing our work-life balance, or increasing profitability because we're not spending as much time, reduction in overtime, or whatever it may be? Is this something that's going to help us be more secure or more fast or more responsive to the business? So I want to know how this will apply as it moves up the chain so that I can help ease that move up the chain. If I'm talking to a data center manager, that data center manager is probably not going to be the purchaser, right? Whether I'm selling to them from outside or you work from them underneath, they probably aren't the person signing the checks. So they're still going to have to take that message another level. And at some point, somebody wants to know why this thing is required. And the words we use as engineers aren't relevant once you get up there. Nobody cares about latency in a boardroom. Nobody cares about virtualization density in a boardroom. They couldn't care less of whether it's serverless functions, containers, virtual machines, physical machines, or mainframes, as long as it fits their budget and meets the business needs. So how do we translate those terms up becomes really important. And it's very dictated by the field or area you're in. So on a networking side, terms like latency translate way up to the stack into user experience and customer experience. On the virtualization side, things like density translate to cost savings or power and cooling savings. So the idea is just to look into your world, understand the value at your level, and see how that translates at each level up. Because the more you can communicate to those layers, the more chance you have of persuading them to do the thing you're trying to do. If you are talking about sales in this fashion, this is a good time to mention that if a client is having a conversation with you that you could potentially sell them something in, clients aren't stupid. They aren't talking to you because they have no intent to buy. If they're talking to you, your job is just to get them to make the decision they were already going to make. They're already interested in buying. I've never walked into a car dealership because I wanted a hot dog. I walked into a car dealership because I wanted a car. The salesperson's job was just not basically to keep me from walking away before I bought a car, because I was already there to do the thing. That's the general gist. And it's not 100% universal, but you should think of it that way when you're framing these discussions. If they're going to give you time, it's because they think you can give them value. I'll pause there for a moment, Chris, and see if we've got any feedback or questions.
There are a lot of people nodding in agreement. I myself amongst them. Understanding the company's business drivers is the first step in helping to get your aligned goals, moving in the right direction. If you know what keeps, I hate using the phrase keeps people up at night, but if you know what the reason why they want to go in a certain direction, it doesn't matter if their compression is better than 50%. It matters that they're making more sales. It matters, the bottom line is what makes a difference. And if you can get that into your head, you can convince them to go down a technological route if it gets them that way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And at the end of the day, these things will help you up-level your skill set. They will help you move into managerial roles if that's where you want to go. They're a set of soft skills that really help in any way I've seen in my career. But at the end of the day, you also want to remember they're dials. There are dozens of dials you can turn to create career success. Your job is to identify them and decide which ones you're willing to turn. Maybe you don't want to go get a copy of Harvard Business Review and start learning boardroom speak. That's okay, but you're going to have to find other dials to turn to get the results you want. The next, I've found throughout my career, whether I was a sales engineer selling to customers or a seller selling to customers, the harder I worked to add value to my customer, the easier selling got. So when I'm working with a client, my only thought in my mind is how can I add value? It's not what sale am I going to make, because I know if I find a problem and solve that problem, they'll let me monetize that solution, right? If I find a problem and I solve their problem, they will allow me to monetize that solution. It's not going to be a discussion. They're not going to go, I'm not paying for that. So my job is to figure out where I can add value by solving a problem. And that goes back to that 2 ears and 1 mouth. I have an idea of the conversation I want to have. and I'll say a few things to get that started. But the second my customer or my client or my boss begins talking, I want to keep them talking until I find that perfect thing to hone in on, right? I do this whether I'm interviewing, I do this whether I'm negotiating salary, I do this with my clients, I do this with my boss does this with me. We want to get in there and you want to keep the other person talking. One of the best job offers I ever got was from walking into an interview and asking a couple open-ended questions to a gentleman that really liked to talk about himself. And so for an hour, he talked about himself and I smiled and I enjoyed his conversation and I loved his stories and I said nothing and he offered me a job because he was happy. And that's all I had to do was make him happy. So when you look at it, if you're looking to add value, if you're really trying to do something right for your customer, you won't come off sounding like you're trying to sell them and you will be able to sell more. The best example I have of this is about 2 years ago. I had the heating and air conditioning, the ducting in my house split into 2 zones. Long story, but it needed to be split into 2 zones. So they were just going to do some duct work, some sheet metal work in the attic. The guy I used is a guy I'd used for a few electrical projects and a few other things around my house. I trusted him. He did good work, good cost, good cleanliness. He was great. So he gets up there and they're doing the duct work, and he came down to let me know that my air conditioner was going to go out within the next couple of years. And he gave me 3 options. There was a do nothing option and there was a replace everything option. And I trusted him because he always came over and added value. So when I asked him what he would do, and he said he would do in his own home, the highest value one, I said, okay. And he made the biggest sale he ever made with me in a time window like that because he built trust by adding value. It's literally that simple. A lot of the other stuff just overcomplicates this. When we look at adding value and having that conversation and keeping that conversation flow, this really ugly slide that I built and then I retweaked to make less ugly, still came out ugly, tells the story of how that conversation should happen. So 10 years ago, I wrote a blog called The Art of Pre-Sales, and it was my guide to being a pre-sales engineer, an engineer in the sales team. And at that time, the thing that inspired that blog was I watched a conversation with a customer. And this was the early days of UCS. So if you work in virtualizations, you're probably familiar with Cisco's UCS and the interesting idea of this networking company launching a server in the heyday of virtualization. So in that world, I'm working with a sales engineer from Cisco who's presenting Cisco UCS to a customer. And he's got the standard slide deck that everyone presents UCS with. And he's going through it slide by slide, very artfully telling the story on that slide. And he gets to a slide where there's power and cooling and the savings of power and cooling. And the customer goes, that's great. That's exactly what I need. I have huge power and cooling problems. And he goes, awesome, we can help with that. Click. And he keeps talking about other stuff. And he loses the customer because he just went past the pain point. He found the problem and said, don't care. Let's talk about virtualization density now. That is not how a conversation goes when you're trying to add value or be a consultant or sell or persuade or negotiate. The conversation should drill down into entrance points. Don't look at a PowerPoint deck as railroad tracks that you can't get off on. Don't let PowerPoint don't become the tool for PowerPoint. It is the tool. So when you start those conversations, whether it's on a whiteboard or just at a water cooler, or it's over WebEx, it shouldn't be a start to finish line. We don't hit play and get to the end. We drill down when we see interest. So when you're having these conversations, if they're in person, just watch the people you're talking to. If they're on their phone or on the laptop, they're not interested. As soon as you see them perk up and look at you, now you know you have a thread to pull and drill down until you get to the right level, and then go over and back down and over. And sometimes you might not ever get to the center chunk because you solved the problem they needed at point B or C or D. So the overall concept here is just to be extremely conscious of when somebody you're trying to persuade to do something shows you interest, that's the interest, right? If feature A is the most interesting thing in the world to them, then you don't need to go ahead and list off feature B through Z. Moving forward, the next thing I want to talk about is decision-making traps. And so this is another one that's originated from Harvard Business Review. So the link is there, hbr.org, and I always recommend to any engineer to get a copy of it, to get a subscription to it. It's not overly expensive, and it'll let you know what the technology you work on is doing for the business. You'll be able to see the initiatives and what those C-suite people are talking about. So one of the articles I read over the last few months was on traps in decision-making. And these are interesting because if you learn these, it will help you in every aspect of your life because we all make them. These are psychological human decision-making traps. They're part of our DNA. So if you learn how to help the person you're trying to persuade or sell avoid them, that's awesome. But you can also learn them to be very aware of them yourself, because the more aware of them you are, the less likely you are to fall into them. So there are 8 of them that HBR went through, and I find them all to be absolutely critical to the conversation of sales or persuasion or negotiation or whatever you want to say that I lump into the concept of sales. So first up, anchoring. Anchoring trap is an interesting one. The first opinion, the first thought, the first thing that we hear tends to carry more weight than the second, third, and 400th. So the idea is that we get anchored on an initial thought or feeling. Right? If you grew up with a specific football team, it's probably hard to get past that football team. If you grew up in a specific state, you probably think that state is the best state, just like everyone else in every other state. Right? So we get anchored on these initial thoughts. There's 2 ways you can look at this when you're trying to persuade somebody. So first, let's take a buzzword or a new product or a new solution or a new technology. If you're the first one to bring it to me and you frame it in a positive light when you bring it to me, cloud is going to be the greatest thing, Joe. Put all your money in cloud and Bitcoin. I can now probably going to be anchored on that idea that these things are good. That anchoring will sit with me now. So you can use this in the idea of if you're first to the idea with that person, then they will be slightly anchored to that. Now, again, I don't use it to be manipulative, but I would always like to take the solution I actually believe in and anchor them on that before somebody else anchors them on their solution. Avoiding this trap in yourself or in the conversation is a different story. So what you want to be able to do is approach from different perspectives, and then you want to bring in multiple outsiders for input. The idea is get away from the single anchored person carrying the weight of the discussion. You want to make sure that you're able to get other perspectives from that person and other opinions in to be able to get past that anchoring. Again, this is something we all suffer from. So it's good to be cognizant of it because typically, whatever your first idea was on a subject, it's going to be harder to change you from that into another one. The next one, and this is my favorite in our current world, the status quo trap. We as humans really like things to stay exactly as they are. For the last 12 plus months, we've all been talking about a new normal. Normal is another word for status quo. We just want things to be vanilla, right? But that status quo trap creates a problem in our decision making. The friction in our brain of the idea of change makes it much easier to do what we do now. So if you've been in IT for a while, you've probably heard a manager at some point say, well, that's how we do it. And so you sat back and you cried silently and said, well, it's a stupid way, to yourself, because that's the status quo trap. We did it that way yesterday. What's different today? Why should we change? So this is another trap we have as humans that you can help your customer avoid. In some cases, you can also use it to your advantage. So if I'm trying to convince my management to adopt the latest automation solution to alleviate all of my command line configuration or shell scripting I have to do, then I might tell them all the things that are going to stay the same as we add this change. So sure, the change is going to speed us up operationally, but let me tell you all the things that will stay status quo. So you can use it to kind of put in the framing that will help them understand. To avoid it, we want to focus on objectives, right? Status quo only works if we only need what happened yesterday, right? Status quo will give me the same thing it did yesterday, today. So if you frame it based on objectives, what are we trying to do? and the status quo can't meet that, then you've solved that problem, or at least put a logical argument forward to solve that problem. People don't always believe in logic. Maintain options, keep things as open as possible. It allows you to be more fluid. That's one of the best things I could tell you in a technical role, especially if you're going to be a technical seller of some point. Keep things fluid, keep your options open. Don't say a vendor name until you need to say a vendor name. Don't say a product name until you need to say a product name. There's always 3 or 4 tools to solve any given problem. So don't lock down a conversation tighter than it needs to. Keep the options open. And then finally, avoid exaggerating switching costs. So you'll see this a lot where people will go, oh, it'll cost us a fortune and take 6 months to switch from A to B. If those are accurate, great. If they're exaggerated, bring them back to reality because they're just trapping us in that status quo. I'll pause here again, Chris. Any other feedback, comments we want to cover?
A couple of people. So when you were talking about the previous pitfall, people were saying things like change averse, brain friction. One question that popped up that's I think you'll probably get to it towards the end as you're going through these different pitfalls is how do you recognize them and well I guess you're actually going through it now, so yeah, you're talking about it now, so no questions. You're answering the one that was in there.
Perfect. Yeah, and these are going to be, they're a little subjective. You're not going to recognize them every time, but the more you look for them, the more you'll start to see them. And the easiest way to practice them is watch them in yourself. As you're talking to people and just doing what you do normally, you can start to see them in yourself. And so that gives you an option to change it if you don't like it, but it also lets you learn when to see it and what it looks like. And that's mainly most of this stuff I test on myself. Because again, it's stuff we all do, we just don't realize we do it. Sunk cost is the next one. This one happens all the time. Sunk cost will trap all of us. We will all do this. You will do it at any given time. There's 2 sides of sunk cost. So don't think of it just monetarily. It's typically money and time. How much time have I sunk into this thing and how much money have I sunk into this thing? The typical, like the sitcom example of sunk cost, it would be like an 80s sitcom where dad decides to build the addition himself and dad's been at it for 4 months and dad can't get it done, but he's sunk so much time into it, he's not willing to call a professional. That's a sunk cost. It's the time and money. I'm already here. I got to finish this thing out, right? Sunk cost. The solution to a sunk cost fallacy or a sunk cost problem is always to abandon the lost cause. You're never going to spend enough money on that broken project that it becomes a smart decision. It's abandoned almost universally, but you have to get the person you're talking to around to that side. So there's typically no beneficial use, or at least I have not yet come up with any beneficial use of sunk cost, a way to use it to my advantage. To me, it's always a negative thing. So there's a few things to do to avoid this trap, because everyone has it, right? You'll see this all over the place. Projects get started, they get funded, and they're not working, and everyone knows they're not working, but we're going to keep feeding it money and hope that one day it generates revenue. We all do it in different ways. When you look at this, to avoid it, again, you want to consult outside opinions. You're going to see that a lot throughout this. The reason is your hangups are different than my hangups. So you get most of us, a few of us in a room that be participants in this decision, we're going to see different perspectives, and that sunk cost will typically get eroded away by one of those perspectives. The other 2 are the harder ones. To avoid sunk cost, you have to be okay. You have to be allowed to fail. So being allowed to fail is one of the hardest things you'll ever do in your life, because you have to convince yourself you're allowed to fail, and then the environment you're in has to support it. So if you want to avoid your teams or your colleagues or your family with the sunk, if you want to avoid sunk cost fallacy in those environments, make it okay to fail. Make it okay to make mistakes, because that's what sunk cost is. That's where it comes from. No one wants to admit their mistakes, so they'd rather keep shelling out money, because the second I stopped shelling out money, I said I screwed up. So try to make a culture where failure is okay. And if you're dealing with a client, now you need to figure out how to soften the concept of failure. You need to get them out of the idea that that sunk cost is admission of or guilt or failure, and get them into what they're going to get out of it, right? So where are they going to go? So another piece of that, if you're working negotiator or working with a client, would be to get them thinking about where they really need to be, and is this sunk cost ever going to get us there? And if it's not, then let's see how to merge it into new. Next, Warren Buffett, a guy that makes money with money. He has a quote on this that I love. It's perfect. It says everything, right? The sunk cost fallacy boils down to, when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. Stop putting money into that thing. It's not, you gave it $10 last month and $10 every month before that, and it's still not flowering. Just get rid of it. Every IT department in the world that I've ever seen has some sunk cost projects sitting there being care and fed for, and half of them are OpenStack related. Confirming evidence is another one. This one's big. If you were a participant in the human race in 2020, then you are aware of how fun confirming evidence bias can be. Doesn't matter what side of any aisle you're on, we all did it. I'm completely right. Let me Google, why is Joe so darn right? Oh, look at all these articles that Google fed me that say, why is Joe so darn right? Because Google makes money when they give me what I want. Confirming evidence is the concept that if I have a belief and I go to look for evidence, I'm going to look for the supporting evidence, and my brain is going to see it first. It's going to absorb it. If you want to go a level deeper, it's your reticulator activation system, or the RAS, that's filtering information in. I already believe this thing, so it's going to filter in the things that confirm that. This is an automatic process that is hard to avoid unless you consciously look for it, but we all do it, right? When you look at that, you can use this to your advantage by aligning your solution to their existing assumptions. If I already know a client hates vendor X, then I can start my conversation with, vendor X sucks. That's why I'd like to present you with vendor Y, right? So if I already know they have a bias, and I can use that bias to my advantage to take them to a solution that will help them do what they're doing, or to get me to the goal I'm trying to negotiate for, we can do that. In most cases, we have to try and avoid this, or help our client, customer, person we're trying to persuade come out of this. So at that point, we need somebody to play devil's advocate. Now, you'll hear devil's advocate used, and you'll hear somebody immediately saying, we have enough devil's advocates. I get that some people are just contrarian. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just contrarian. I love to just argue for the sake of arguing. I'm not talking about me.
Yeah, you do.
Absolutely. No, I don't. So, but I'm not talking about that specifically. I'm talking about taking the stance of the other side is right and arguing it in a amicable fashion, so that we can see if we're missing gaps or having confirmation bias. So if you're talking about you and your friend or your buddy or your partner, one of you play devil's advocate and figure it out, because chances are, you might be similar in having the same confirmation bias. So by one of you taking the other role, like you do in debate club in high school, you can start to suss out if that logic actually works. But you have to commit to it, right? You have to actually try and take that other stance. If you're working with a client to do this, the idea would be to get them to play devil's advocate if nobody's taking on that role naturally. Beyond that, watch for sycophants. These are yes people. Call them whatever you want, brown nosers, whatever. If there's somebody in the room that's always agreeable to the senior person in the room, remember that, see what you can do to mitigate it and isolate it, because otherwise what you get is confirmation bias from the senior person and Mr. I need a raise saying, yes, 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 you're right, sir, you're right, sir, you're right, sir. So you want to try and mitigate that, because it's just going to make it harder to get the conversation across. And then finally, present both sides of the case. And in both pieces, anywhere it is, whether it's in a personal relationship or it's negotiating for that salary or selling a technology solution, present both sides so that there is evidence on both sides. If somebody's presenting to you, make sure that you're getting both sides of the information, right? If I'm buying technology, I'm never going to ask the vendor to come in and tell me about it, because the vendor has one side of the information and that's their only goal. I'm going to ask some sort of trusted partner or trusted, reliable person that has some independence, right? None of us have perfect independence. I just want some. Taking that a step further into framing. Framing is an interesting one, and this one can very much be used to your advantage, and this is probably one that can be manipulated more than any of the others. It's also one I guarantee you do multiple times a day because we all do it. The way I present a problem to you, or a statement or a solution, is going to influence how you think about it. So I'll give you a quick example. We hear often that 9 out of 10 dentists agree on a lot of things, right? So that's framed in a way that I think 90% of dentists agree on this. This must be the best toothpaste ever. It looks just like every other toothpaste. I can't tell the difference, but 9 out of 10 dentists, that's extremely important information. They don't say 1 out of 10 dentists tells you this will kill you instantly if you use it on your teeth. But if I frame it that way, it's different. If I tell you 1 out of 10 dentists don't like this toothpaste, it's not an advertisement anymore, right? The simple framing of the same piece of information dictates how you're going to receive that information. So this is important to understand in your own speech. How are you framing the solution to your customer? Are you framing it as, yeah, I know it's expensive, but it's going to solve your problem? Or are you framing it as, this is the right solution to solve your problem? Now, on the back end, if they're framing it, if you're trying to avoid someone else framing it, reframe it. Always reframe everything. If you're going in to buy a car, that salesperson is going to come in and they're going to try and make the conversation go into a finance conversation. They want to move that sale of that car, regardless of what you want to do, into a finance conversation, because now they can frame it as monthly payments or the cost of the car, depending on where they need to play with your mind to get you to make the sale. So they're constantly reframing the conversation to manipulate you into spending more money by deciding which one looks better, the monthly payment or the total cost of the car. So you want to reframe it in your terms to avoid that. Right? It's the same thing. You can use it to your advantage. The defense is judo, right? You're going to use your opponent's weight against them. So you're going to reframe. Challenge any framing they give you, anyone gives you, if you're trying to avoid this, or if the client or person you're trying to convince is framing something in a way that isn't conducive to the conversation, reframe it or challenge the frame. And then finally, wherever you can do it, use neutral framing unless there's a specific reason that you're intentionally framing something. And so that's the only last piece I say. If I don't have an intent, if there's not a purpose in my conscious brain for framing something, I'm going to try and use the most neutral framing possible, right? It's a 50-50 decision, whatever it might be. So that is typically one of the topics that I get quite a lot of questions on around framing. So I will pause there and see if there was anything new, Chris.
Siggy, did you see one?
I don't know if we had a question specifically on this slide at the moment. We did have a question from Mohammed a little bit ago, and he asked what your favorite book for pre-sales is.
So that is a great question. I have found a big gap in the market for technical or pre-sales engineering books and training. I've heard a couple people tout 1 or 2, but I don't know the name and author and I haven't read it. But it is a gap. So most of what I do, it's learned from both pure sales training, pure sales books and tactics, and then incorporated back in to experience in engineering. But if anyone in the chat or on the call has a suggestion, please drop in the chat and I'll recommend it out.
I actually have a good one. Mastering Technical Sales by John Kerr and Aaron Bolig is actually quite good. It's got a lot of good tech. It's specifically for technical pre-sales people. And a friend of mine that is actually Randy Weiss from over in Bean. He's fantastic in pre-sales, and he said, "Chris, you need to read this cover to cover, and you'll know everything that I know." I was like, "Wow, okay, Randy." I'll put that in the show notes.
That's awesome. That is the name I'd heard before, so that's fantastic. And when you look at it, I think the hardest thing that I've ever seen for any technical person that's moving into any sales related role is just accepting that term sales, right? Many of us have a stigma on sales. We think of this used car salesman trying to get me to buy the lemon at a top price, and it's going to fall apart 3 days later after the law expires, right? And yeah, those people exist. We all know them. You're always going to see them. But they're not everybody. There are a lot of sellers out there that they do their entire job adding value to their customer and making good money for it. And that's what we're looking to do. So if you are technical and you're looking to be a better seller, or you're looking to move into sales, accept that aspect. And if you want, take an engineering approach to it, because again, humans are a system you can master just like you can a network or a virtualization stack. We talked a lot about framing. We talked a lot about framing in how do we handle their framing? How do we change framing? But the other thing you can do is frame their objections for them. Now, this is my favorite tool in a conversation. And this doesn't matter if I'm arguing with my imaginary spouse, or if I'm having a conversation with my manager, or if I'm trying to sell to a client. I always want to frame their objections for them. And this is counterintuitive to almost anything I've ever seen anyone say about sales or sales engineering. I tell my customers what the problems are before they think of them. That way I can frame them. So I will say, yeah, I know this doesn't have the scale you need today, and you're aware of that. So let me show you what the roadmap says so that you know when it's coming. But let's be clear, it doesn't have what you need today, but it should grow with you over time. Or I know this is a little bit outside of the budget that you were looking for, but here's the thing, right? So however you want to do that, if I can take that problem, that issue, that concern, and frame it before they come to it, it will help alleviate it more quickly and more elegantly. And the reason is, if you're talking to me and you're explaining something and my brain starts to formulate an objection and it just gets allowed to do that, the objection grows from something small into something big before you pause and I decide it's ready for a question. So by the time I get to tell you about the objection, it's now this big instead of this big. If I frame it in advance, it's this big. This all came full circle in a conversation with a CIO for a large media company years ago, who looked at me across an executive briefing table and said, Joe, tell me every problem with your product. I'm going to buy your product, but I need to know every issue with it, because if I find the problem later, it's a problem. If you tell me now, I can architect around it. Right? And that's exactly what it is. Customers aren't stupid. Clients aren't stupid. Your partner isn't stupid. Your manager isn't stupid, or maybe they are. I've had 1 or 2 or 6. Exactly 6. Okay. But you don't treat them stupid regardless. Like, let them know the good, the bad, and let them know why you still believe in the solution. And if you don't, then why are you talking to them about it? Next is the overconfidence trap. So this is not just somebody being arrogant, which I have never been accused of except daily, but overconfidence trap is we tend to provide more confidence, more say in our own opinion, in our own estimates than reality would dictate. So we tend to be more overconfident in our estimate than we should. So when we get into this type of trap, or when you see this trap, there is a proactive use, something you can do to help use it to your advantage. And that's to allow for beneficial estimates that the client makes. If the client is making their estimate and it works to your point or what you're trying to drive, let them be overconfident in it because it's serving you. If it's not serving you, now you need to figure out a way to get them back to reality. Now, to get them back to reality, question estimates. You should always question estimates, right? And we're going to talk about another estimation trap. Human estimates are always typically bad. Always typically is really crappy language. Identify extremes. So identify any extremes, right? When we're making these estimates, are we talking about a ninja jumping out of a bush on a blue moon on Wednesday? That's an extreme on this end. And then what's the extreme here on this end? Off camera. When we talk about those extremes, we want to figure out where they exist, and then we want to challenge the heck out of them, right? Especially in engineering, most most solutions don't need to design for the weirdest corner cases in IT, right? Like we have to handle the norms, the 80%. Now, there are exceptions, lots of exceptions. So don't beat me up on that. But in the most of the cases, I don't need to have that very corner case handled for every little piece. Let's focus on reality. And if there are extremes, let's at least verify that those extremes need to be discussed, need to be handled, or are they just straw man arguments being used to derail? Next is the prudence trap. So the prudence trap is, again, it's another estimation type trap. We tend to estimate on the safe side. So I do this all the time, right? If I'm thinking about the cost of an employee I want to hire, I'm estimating higher than their total cost is going to be to me because I feel like that's the safe side. So estimations on the safe side are something we all tend to do. There's a lot of problems with this. One of them is your safe side and my safe side, I guarantee, are different, right? So if I'm estimating on the safe side and you're estimating on the safe side, we could be orders of magnitude off by this point, especially if we start getting more people involved. So when we look at this, you can use it proactively to cushion for delivering outstanding services and things like that. So for instance, if I'm bidding services with a customer, I want to make sure that my team can get in and out delivering excellent services to that customer or client before the deadline. So I am going to overestimate a little bit because I'd love to tell them 3 months and be done in 80 days, right? So that is a place where I will use it to my advantage to create the outcome I want to create. I've never had a client be mad because I finished early. I've definitely had some clients angry because we were taking too long. So that's an example of how you might use this type of idea to your advantage. In most cases, what we want to do is avoid these overprudent traps and really get back to an accurate estimate wherever possible, and then require the same from the team and the customer, right? So if somebody on the customer side is throwing out estimates that are safe, safe side estimates that just aren't working, just look for accurate data. Try and make it more accurate. If I tell you, let's go with 800 whatevers to be on the safe side, ask me, well, what's that based on? What's the non-safe side number, right? Just ask a couple of questions and you can get back to a real estimate. And then we get to recallability. So recallability is a simple one. We tend to put a lot more stake in our past experiences as predictors of future experiences, right? We do this all over the place and it's really dangerous. So back in the long ago, there was this thing called conferences. And at conferences, we often migrated to different locations like Las Vegas, which is a mystical land of desert and lights. And when we went to Las Vegas, they had gaming tables everywhere, and you could throw away your money in the most amazing and shiny and noisy ways possible. And one of the tables was called roulette. And roulette is a game of random chance where a ball bounces around and it picks one of 60 some slots or 30 slots or however many slots and it pops out. Every time a roulette ball spins, the math resets. That ball can do anything it wants every time it spins. It's a new, fresh statistical set of data. But at those roulette tables, they put up a little board. And that board shows me where that ball landed the last 10 or 15 times. Because my brain has this recallability trap. So I see that that roulette ball landed on black 15 times in a row. And there's no way it could land on black 16 times in a row. Except there is. Every time the ball rolls, it's a fresh spin of the odds. So it can land on black 1 billion times in a row. But that recallability trap makes me think, put more money down, red is a sure bet. That's the trap. Our past experience is useful and it's important, but we put more weight on it than we should, and we don't assess all the other factors in the situation. So what I did at my last company probably worked really well, but this company doesn't have the same team, the same operations, the same everything. So it might not work as well. So when we look at this, the way to use it to your advantage is drawing parallels to past experiences. Hey, boss, if we use this new thing, it'll work just like that other thing we did 3 years ago. Madam customer, if you take on this new solution, this will operate in the way that other thing operated, right? Whatever it might be. So you can use it to your advantage. on the other side, to help your client avoid it, or the person you're negotiating with, or the conversation moving forward, what you want to look at is examining all your assumptions closely. You want to check your facts, and you want to check current recommended practices, right? Tech moves fast. Yesterday's best practice is today's worst idea. So always go back to any recommended practices that are out there. Always go back to the facts and try and get past this idea that just because it worked for me yesterday, it's going to work for tomorrow. Now, when you think about these tied together, you start to think of the recallability trap, and then we had the status quo trap. So many of these are intertwined. It's really easy for your client or the person you're discussing to get stuck in a rut, because that's what our brain wants to do. It wants to do more of the same, and it wants to think that the thing we did yesterday is going to work. So the next thing to remember and note about this is that a trap plus a trap is really, really bad. And this happens all the time. So one trap gets added to another trap, gets added to another trap, and that's going to make for your worst possible decisions. So when you're looking through them, try and help the people you're working with avoid them, but also try and help yourself avoid them, right? We all do this pretty frequently. Chris, how are we looking on time and questions?
I guess I should unmute myself, shouldn't I? We are looking good on time. We've got a couple of minutes left. We don't have any questions. We have a lot of people giving you crap though. So that seems to be par for the course. When you said something about playing it safe, somebody said Joe and safe. That just doesn't sound right.
No, it doesn't. I've never done a single thing in my life the safe way.
No, we are good. I have scoured. Zig, do you see any questions?
I do not. We're good.
We're good, sir.
All right, good. And we're up on our timer. Do we have 30 minutes left? I couldn't recall.
We well, how much talking you got left?
This is a great point to wrap it up, or we could, or there is a little more. Just because I bombed out last week.
So we are at the hour mark. However, if you've got some additional stuff that you want to talk about, this is all really good knowledge. So I don't mind going a little bit longer if you don't.
Why don't we go ahead and we'll cut it here, and then if there's some interest, we can do another session after you wrap up the rest of your leadership stuff and get something scheduled later down the road.
Okay, all right, let's do that. Absolutely, that'll be super fun.
All right.
Cool. All right. Well, in that case, Joe, this was extremely valuable. I definitely appreciate this. A lot of this resonated with me. Throughout my time in boardrooms and data centers and everything in between. All these are some excellent tricks of the trade to get people to not do the Jedi mind trick, but to get them to see the rationality and the light of day, and putting yourself in their shoes is some, I'm not going to say Psych 101, because it's not a Jedi mind trick. It's just listening to somebody and helping them come to a good decision. Lots of good stuff, quality content, crap presenter, good stuff, Joe. Really like it. You can keep Joe though. These people love you, man. There is so much love in this room right now. Wow.
Sounds like love. I mean, I really feel warm and tingly right now.
You can feel it. You can feel it.
We kiss as we love.
You always hurt the ones closest to you, Joe.
Well, thank you all very much, and thank you, vBrownBag and Chris for hosting me.
Awesome. Thanks a bunch, everybody. We will be back once again next week to continue our IT career series. Joe, we will definitely, absolutely, 100% have you back on again to continue this. This was some fantastic information. Thanks very much.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody. Have a good one.